Frankfurt. My name is Khanh. I am a tech lawyer with the British law firm Simmons & Simmons, focusing on capital markets. I'm a trained capital markets lawyer, but have some experience in-house with settlement and clearing. And this is the way, the introduction to blockchain, because blockchain is disrupting how we settle or clearing. It might disrupt how we settle and clear. And if Julian is here to inspire you about blockchain, then I would say I'm here to bring you to reality about the topic regulation and blockchain. So blockchain and regulation has two things in common, at least two things in common. The one would be it comes with a set of its own language, so it comes with a set of words and vocabulary. And the other thing, the other element is that it is, you have the impression that it's quite dry. But I hope I can perform something for you to listen after this great speech of Julian. Regulation of blockchain-based platforms comes always with definitions of terms. As a lawyer, we love terms and definitions to them. And it starts basically with two definitions that I want to provide you today. The one would be what is blockchain from a legal perspective, and the other one would be what is regulation, or what is the law in this topic. And it comes down to basically what I try to accomplish is a dialogue between two sets of principles. The one, the technology principles, and the other one, the principles of regulation or law. And it comes down, and I would like to start with the end, to conclude that the conclusion with this dialogue is that it is an open system, that we are at the spring of collaboration in terms of two different worlds. The one that is binary, 0 1s, and the other one would be a legal and analog relationship set of rules. Starting with blockchain, and this is a presentation that I gave for legal colleagues and bankers, so pardon the high-level approach, but for blockchain, from a legal perspective, from a regulatory perspective, blockchain is nothing else than a history of ownership, a record of ownership. And when I started to think about blockchain and spoke to some of the startup people in London and around the world, there was one guy, a Chinese guy, who mentioned that in China we already have blockchain since 2005 years ago. And actually he was right. Actually, when we look back in time, the records of ownership has always existed, because property law has always existed. And when we look into ancient China, the oldest record of an ownership probably is in ancient China when you transact a ownership over a masterpiece, like this masterpiece. It's very beautiful. It's has a lot of value. And when you transfer this to someone else, then the next owner has the right to put a stamp on this. And with the stamp, he would be the rightful owner of this masterpiece. And this is an example for us not so tech-savvy lawyers to understand what blockchain is. It is a chronological record of an ownership. But the blockchain transferred to nowadays time is different. It is different because it is distributed, and distributed means that the same record is distributed and recorded on different nodes within a peer-to-peer network. And this is significant. We do believe that from a legal perspective, there's a paradigm shift, a change of a mindset that changes from an analogous relationship between people, the direct relationship, towards a decentralized relationship. And then we have to think about the implications in terms of trust, implications in terms of systematic operations, and etc. And I hope this is the segment that is most important in my speech, is that this paradigm shift is going to change what we understand as law, but also it would change how we interact with each other. So blockchain, when you look into regulatory authorities, supervisory authorities, view blockchain particularly combining three technology innovations. And this three technology innovation starts with a peer-to-peer network that provides you with an immutable record of something, of data, property. Cryptography enables you to distribute information to the places that you want, to the people that you want, with the information that you want. And the third part would be the consensus algorithm that verifies the information, that provides you with a single truth of record. And blockchain, and this is a great discussion when you look up regulatory authorities, when you look up European regulations, then it comes always down to DLT, distributed ledger technology. When I started thinking about blockchain, then basically blockchain is like a masterpiece in China. It is a chronological record of ownership. But coming from there are a lot of ways how you can record and how you can verify. And this is the reason when you look into regulation, they always talk about DLT and not blockchain per se. But I think when we think about Bitcoin blockchain and we think about decentralization, then it is worthwhile to look what's underneath this. I do understand that technologically there are a lot of ways to have a consensus algorithm that is not like the original blockchain or other blockchains. It does not need to be chronological. But nevertheless, I think blockchain illustrates how we should amend our mindset. So this is the reason why I talk about blockchain and not DLT. When we look in from a legal perspective, then blockchain is basically has two functions. The one is you certify something. It's a notarization of something, a record, an asset, or a property. And you verify this. And you verify this collaboratively. This means every node is able to verify if you want so. If you construct the system, then everyone in the network is able to verify. You don't have to, but this is the principle. So when we look into blockchain, there are several ways of developments. It starts with Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper introducing the record of Bitcoin, of digital currency. And basically what it does is it records just the movement of an asset and the availability of this asset. And then we have a second development, and this development is called as smart contracts, with Vitalik Buterin introducing a second layer on the blockchain, introducing the possibility that you implement programmable code that self-executes and self-enforces. And the third wave that we are looking into is that goes beyond currencies and smart contracts. It's a combination of contracts and developing of decentralized applications for organizations. And this has a huge impact on how we deal with organizations, applications, and so on. So let's look at the use cases. Let's look at the use cases. And when you see blockchain 1.0, the use case is to record a digital token or digital currency. Then, I'm sorry, I just skipped this. The potential use cases are manifold. So whatever data you can record, digitize, and automate, I should say, is a potential use case in this part. And probably we have a later chance to talk deeper into certain use cases if you want to. But this is just a skim what is possible. And our clients and the market perception is that 2017 would be the year where the first product-ready software or blockchain platforms and systems arrive. And for the more polemic persons, they would probably say a blockchain is a disruptive innovation on search of a use case. But it's true. So let's talk about the second term, regulation. And regulation in terms of blockchain, it always starts with the single question, do we need a blockchain law? Do we need a single blockchain regulation? And this derives from a debate in the 1990s when cyberspace occurred, and the legal debate was very interested in understanding what is cyberspace. And it comes down to the question, should there be a law of the horse? And the law of the horse means, can we touch the horse? Can we, from a legal perspective, can we regulate the horse itself? And abstractly speaking, is, do we need a single body of law? And of course, as a lawyer, it depends who you ask. And this is quite prominent, in the 1990s, a judge in the United States published a white paper concluding that you don't need a single body of law for cyberspace, because a horse is a horse. You cannot regulate the horse. But what you can regulate is the application of different laws. So property law, contract law, and transit law you can regulate, and you can regulate human behavior through the laws and not the horse itself. And the second opinion, or the opposite opinion, comes from a law professor in Harvard, who coined the phrase "code is law." And the basic idea about this phrase is, the underpinning idea about this phrase is that you have different forces that can regulate human behavior. Different forces means practically four. The one would be the law. You can indirectly regulate human behavior. Then you would have norms, ethical norms. I would have to wear a suit if I give a speech, for instance, and this regulates my behavior. And the third would be architecture. So, for instance, you sit in front of the speaker, so you can look how I stand and what I'm presenting. And this regulates ex ante. It regulates while it happens. And the fourth force would be, like architecture, Professor Lessig says that this would be code, programmable code. And it comes down to the basic conclusion, that, or assumption I should say, is that code, like architecture, can regulate human behavior. For that reason, we need a single body of law. And something important for us lawyers is that we can put things into perspective. And put things into perspective is we have different drawers where we can put in things that we think are important. And I think the easiest way to provide you with the perspective of a lawyer is to distinguish between three layers. And the one would be the system layer. This is where the IT comes in. You can regulate the IT, you can regulate the platform itself and your operators. The second one would be what you do on the platform has interaction with the real world. And then you would have a horse is a horse. You can have applications of law to what's happening on the blockchain. And the third one would be the conceptual one, which is more academic. How will blockchain and decentralized applications change the law? And right now, when we look into what law firms are doing, what regulators are doing, they're doing exactly this. They look from a systematic perspective, and they look from the interactive perspective. So they look how are blockchains structured, and what are the implications to the existing framework. And academics look further and say what are the conceptual changes and the change of mindset that we have with blockchain. So from the systematic perspective, we can conclude that two conditions should be met if you want to regulate blockchain. The one would be, you remember the peer-to-peer network. The one would be decentralization. I saw a presentation where an IT guy, it's a great presentation about Bitcoin, and then he concludes that Bitcoin is nothing but independent money. And I thought this was quite right, because in a peer-to-peer network, depending on the structuring of this network, each of the nodes would be independent and verify the information. So what we can say from the legal perspective is, if you want to regulate a blockchain system, you have to change your mindset. Because where we are coming from is a party-to-party relationship. It's an analog direct relationship. It's not distributed. And the second thing would be, and this comes down to the four forces of regulation, that the regulation that we know as far is an exposed regulation. It means it gives us the freedom to do whatever we want, meaning we can enter into contracts. We have the freedom not to enforce the contract. For instance, if I buy my MacBook to Julian, then I would be contractually obligated to transfer my MacBook to Julian, but I don't have to. And this is a freedom, a right. And this is why regulation and law, this is when regulation and law comes in. It steps in when it says, no, Julian deserves my laptop because he gave me consideration. And for that reason, we need to enforce this right. And this is different in code. Code in architecture enforces this ex ante. As mentioned, you sit in front of me, so you can hear me and see me very well, but you cannot see the people behind you very well. And this is what regulates ex ante and what regulates automatically. So for that reason, when regulation focuses on a systematic perspective on blockchain, it always will regulate the operators. It has to distinguish the operators, who is operating the system, what are the liabilities, and how can it regulate the behavior of the operator. Coming to the first use case, the virtual currency, and virtual currency, we usually talk about Bitcoin, Ether, and so on, but there are estimated 500 or more similar virtual currencies that compete with each other. And what they allow is that it's a cheap, fast, and secure transfer between individuals, firms, and I shall say machines. And it comes down to legal challenges. And the legal challenges is, let's check the time. The legal challenges are manifold, but it would come down when we look into what supervisory authorities are discussing right now, what they monitor right now, is the conclusion is that blockchain is not, it's premature to regulate. Remember, we come from a centralized analog view of relationships, and this decentralized structure on the system is not being introduced from the regulator. So what the regulator says, okay, we look blockchain, put this into our existing legal framework, and look how it fits. And to tell you the truth, it fits very well, because it does not fit at all. But what you can do is, you can put this framework and then try to have certain points fitting in this framework, but then you would deconstruct the idea of decentralization, and we'll come to that. But when you look into the first use case of virtual currency, the recording of a digital token, a digital currency, then of course it would compete with our fiat money. So it would compete with money policies that needs to be enforced. But again, when you look at the European, the EBA and the ESMA papers, reports, it comes down to say, let's wait and see. Let's wait and see how far it will spread, and when it will spread, we'll jump in.